There is a deep connection between chess and wars that I show in this video. The bloody chessboard, when kings became pawns. In 1485, a king broke every rule of chess and lost his head for it. Imagine a game where every move could cost you your life, where pawns were real soldiers, where castles burned, and where kings actually died. For 32 years, England became a living chessboard as two families. Lancaster and York red rose against white moved their pieces across blood-soaked fields while nobles plotted in darkness assassins. Struck at midnight, and the knight itself became the most dangerous player of all. This is the Wars of the Roses, but this isn't the story you learned in school. Tonight, you'll discover how a medieval board game predicted and perhaps even caused the death of kings. Because what happened after dark on August 22, 1485, would change chess, warfare, and history itself forever. The year is 1455 and England's nobility gathers in shadowy halls after sunset, because that's when the real strategies were planned while peasants slept. Lords played chess by firelight, studying a game that had one purpose: to teach you how to kill a king. Chess wasn't entertainment. It was military training where every piece represented a real unit in medieval warfare. The pawns were expendable foot soldiers. The knights were cavalry that struck from unexpected angles, the rooks were stone fortresses, and the king was you. But here's what nobody tells you. In 1455, the chess queen was almost powerless, moving only one square at a time, just like the real queens of England. Trapped in a man's Game of Thrones. Then the bloodshed began. On May 22, 1455 at St. Albans, the first battle erupted at dawn. But the strategy was planned the night before as the Duke of York moved his pieces through darkened streets, while the Lancastrians never saw him coming, and in 20 minutes 3 nobles lay dead in the mud. The game had begun, and it would play out over 32 years of midnight betrayals, of pieces falling, of checkmate after checkmate after checkmate. But the bloodiest move was yet to come. March 29, 1461, Palm Sunday. But there was nothing holy about what happened that night near the village of Toten, where two armies, 60,000 men, faced each other as darkness fell, and then came the snow, blinding, suffocating snow that turned the battlefield into a chessboard where no one could see the pieces. The Lancastrians thought they had the advantage with higher ground and more men. But Edward of York, just 19 years old, had studied his chess and understood something his enemies didn't. In darkness, the player who moves first wins. That night Edward's archers used the snow and wind to hide their range, firing blindly into the storm, while Lancastrian arrows fell short, and Edward's arrows found flesh, and by dawn the river ran. Red, so red that chroniclers wrote, the waters could not be drunk for days, as 28,000 men, dyed bodies stacked like captured pawns, swept from aboard. But here's the twist nobody mentions. That night in the darkness men killed their own brothers by mistake, because the white rose soldiers wore the same armor as the red. And in the black of night, surrounded by screaming snow, there was no way to tell friend from enemy. Chess has perfect information, but war has only fog. 10 years later, on April 14, 1471, at the Battle of Barnet, night would decide everything again as Edward IV faced the Earl of Warwick, called the Kingmaker because he'd already decided two monarchs' fates. But that morning, before dawn, a fog descended so thick that soldiers couldn't see 10 feet ahead. And the armies clashed in blindness until horror struck when Warwick's own forces, wearing his badge of a star, mistook their allies for enemies in the fog and attacked each other, while Warwick himself was killed trying to flee, cut down in the darkness by men who never saw his face. On a chessboard, you see everything, but in the Wars of the Roses, the knight was a third player, cruel, unpredictable, and always hungry for more pieces. August 22, 1485, Bosworth Field, the last night of the Old World. And King Richard III, the last Yorkist king, sat in his tent as darkness fell, knowing that tomorrow he would face Henry Tudor, a nobody with a weak claim to the throne. But Richard had the larger army, better position, and every strategic advantage. Richard III knew his chess, and in chess, there's a move so dangerous, so insane, that beginners are taught never to attempt it. Moving your king into attack, because if your king dies, the game ends. At night, before the battle, something strange happened, as Richard's servants later reported that he paced his tent alone, moving objects on a small table, some say a chess set, muttering about moves and countermoves, barely sleeping, with some chroniclers saying he had nightmares, while others claim he knew what was coming, because Richard III had decided to break the ultimate rule. The next morning, as the battle raged, Richard spotted Henry Tudor across the field exposed separated from his main force, and Richard made his move, mounting his horse, gathering his household knights and charging directly at Henry Tudor as the king attacked like a knight in a move that was brilliant, insane, and exactly what chess tells you never to do. For a moment, it almost worked as Richard cut down Henry's standard bearer and came within feet of Henry himself, and if he'd succeeded, if he'd killed Henry in single combat, the war would have ended instantly in checkmate. But then came the betrayal when Lord Stanley's forces, positioned on the flank supposedly neutral, suddenly moved not for Richard but for Henry. In what chess calls a discovered attack, when moving one piece reveals another piece's power, and Stanley's betrayal revealed Henry's true strength. Richard III, surrounded, fought on foot after his horse was killed, with witnesses saying he refused to flee, shouting treason, treason, and his last words were allegedly, "I will die King of England," and he did as his skull was split open and his crown, found in a thorn bush, was placed on Henry Tudor's head right there on the battlefield as the game was over and the White King had fallen. But here's what will haunt you. That night after the battle, Henry Tudor's men stripped Richard's body, naked, and threw it across a horse like a common criminal, and for 2 days his corpse was displayed in Leicester with no royal burial, no dignity, just a dead king treated like a sacrificed pawn. And it took 527 years to find his bones buried under a parking lot. With 11 wounds, his spine twisted from scoliosis, the king who broke the rules of chess became the king who vanished into history's darkness. But something else happened in that same decade that nobody connects to the Wars of the Roses, but maybe, just maybe they should. Because between 1475 and 1500, right as the Wars of the Roses ended, chess suddenly changed as the queen, that weak piece that could barely move, transformed when chess players in Spain and Italy started giving her unlimited diagonal movement, making her the most powerful piece on the board, able to strike across the entire battlefield in a single move, and nobody knows for certain why. But think about it. England had just torn itself apart because kings played war like chess. And in the end, it wasn't knights or castles that decided everything. It was betrayal. It was information. It was the unpredictable human element that chess could never capture. So players made chess more dangerous, more realistic, more like the wars they just survived as the weak queen became a force of nature. The game accelerated and the knight metaphorically entered the chessboard. Some historians believe the new chess queen's chess, or mad queen, chess spread because soldiers and nobles returning from the Wars of the Roses demanded a game that matched the brutality they witnessed, while others say it's coincidence, but coincidences in the darkness of history are rarely just coincidences. The Wars of the Roses ended 539 years ago, but its lesson echoes every time you touch a chess piece. Because here's the truth they don't teach you: chess is a game of perfect information, played in the light, where both players see everything, but real war, real power happens in the dark, in the fog, in the snow, in the moments when you can't tell friend from enemy, when kings gamble their lives on a single desperate move. Richard III broke the rules and lost everything, as the Wars of the Roses taught England that in darkness, anyone can become a pawn, and that the only way to survive is to change the rules of the game entirely. So tonight, when you look at a chessboard, remember, every piece was once a person, every move a life or death decision, and every game a memory of the nights when kings learned they could bleed. And the question is, what other games are we still playing without realizing they're preparing us for something darker? Subscribe to Past X Proof to uncover more secrets hidden in history's longest night.